Good morning, everyone. PatBenage here, the evolution coach, creator of the 6-week shift, the inner path, and this inspirational blog, SoulTalk. And this morning, I'm doing my first SoulTalk video indoors, as it's rainy and windy and no outdoors this week. So I've been blessed to be able to do that into the middle of October, and that's pretty unusual. So I'm glad to have been able to do that. But it's nice to be indoors and have a little bit different environment. Gives me a chance to set up my little space here, and working on getting some different pictures. But thought I'd just bring my kids out. A long time ago when they're just little, but anyway, today, something's been coming through for me that's been kind of the theme this week in my own contemplations. And that's typically what ends up coming into my soul talk, is what's kind of been coming through in my experience during the week. But this one, there's been a couple of different themes, a couple of different aspects to one theme, basically, that have arisen in me. And the first one is the idea of retreating and kind of all of the things that means. And I've retreated. It's interesting because I've retreated indoors out of nature to do this soul talk this week. But we use that term retreat in so many different ways. It retreat like running away, retreat like going to a retreat to relax, to sort of unwind. We do a retreat, we think of sometimes it's getting back to nature. And that can be a good thing. And retreat can be a good thing in all of those aspects of it. But what kind of came to me is that life is really about advancing. It's not about retreating, it's about advancing. And so the thing that I would say maybe we need to be a little cautious of is staying in that retreat mode. I know a lot of people who find a spiritual sense in nature, and there is a certain degree of that, and I've talked about this before, but nature is a way of feeling closer to Source. But it's not the way to get closer to Source. And what I mean by that is, in order to get closer to Source, we have to advance through life. We don't have the ability to go backwards. Yes, the earth is sort of, it's nearer to Source in a way because it hasn't evolved away in the physical aspect of things, away from Source as far as the human consciousness has. It hasn't evolved away as much as the animal consciousness has. All of those things are still a little closer tied to Source than the human consciousness. And the human consciousness is, as I've said before, really, in a way, the furthest we can get away from Source, in a sense of our devolution process into the physical experience, and then we have to evolve through the physical aspect of that experience, and the pinnacle of that is the human experience. And So that is the furthest away from source. In other words, our consciousness is stretched as far from that source as possible, which makes it the most challenging to feel connected with source. We always are connected, but it's the most challenging point at which to experience that connection. And so the natural reaction to feeling disconnected is to want to retreat, go back, and we have an innate sense that going back somewhere we felt closer to it. And so in nature we feel closer, so we retreat. But the way to the end is to advance. It's to advance beyond the human consciousness to get to our soul consciousness. And so that's the way through. So we have to advance. We can retreat momentarily to sort of regain balance, but we can't use that continuously. It becomes like a defense mechanism. It becomes an escape. And I see a lot of people that use it that way. And ultimately, we have to let go of that. Just like everything else that ties us to this physical world, that's something that does that. And so ultimately, we're going to have to transcend that. We're going to have to get through that. And the way out of everything is through. It's not to run away, to retreat. So that was one thing that came through to me this week. And in a bigger sense, that sort of evolved into this idea, and I saw something this morning that had been posted on Facebook by Ram Dass, and it was maybe somebody posted something from Ram Dass, or something, and it was about being versus doing. And so the thing that came through to me was there's a tricky balance between being and doing. And if we go too much into being and we forget about doing, that's in essence, we're retreating, because we still have to do things. We still have to advance through life. And so there are things that we must do in that process of life itself, our evolutionary process. We can't just simply retreat into that inner space and just get into a state of being that is not doing. And yet, at the same time, we can't get trapped. It's easy to get trapped into the doing things of life. We can get trapped into all of the stuff that we have to do, or we feel like we have to do. All the stuff that needs to be done, that can be done, that we want to do. And we forget about who we are in relation to that. So what our life experience becomes is a reaction. We become very reactive, very unconscious. And that's the typical instinctive way of being, physically instinctive, emotionally instinctive way of being. It's not a conscious way of being. It's not making choices that are made from this inner truth, from who I am. So the way to balance the being and doing and the retreating versus advancing is to, in each moment, be conscious of what's showing up and be conscious of what choice I wish to make, given what shows up. And the only way to be truly conscious about that is to get to know who I am. I have to know who am I? What am I about? And I have to be able to understand that all that occurs, all that I create, my whole experience is something that I am creating out of my choices. That my choices aren't based on what's happening, but rather they're based on who I choose to be in relationship with that. There's still a doing process. I still make a choice. I still choose something in this moment, in each moment. But if my choice is made as a reaction to what's showing up, then my whole balance point is in the doing. I'm out of balance. I'm in the doing aspect of it, and I'm never in the being aspect. So, in other words, I'm in the advancing, but I'm never in the retreat. So we have to retreat in a way that brings our attention inward, brings our attention to our inner self. And so that's the retreat in here. My attention tends to be outside of myself on what's going on. So I have to bring that attention back inside into my true self. And in the process of doing that, then I can see more clearly what's happening and make a choice from that state of being. Does that make sense? I hope that's something that makes sense in this process, to be able to distinguish, okay, what do I need to do when this happens, and this happens, when this happens? We tend to react to things. We tend to get into a mode of doing it the same way, and we get wrapped up in the doing. And when we get wrapped up in the doing, we get distracted by all of the stuff that's happening outside of ourselves. And it's a never-ending cycle. That's why we end up at some point wanting to retreat. We get into that mode, and then we want to retreat. We want to get away. We want to get out of that. But we retreat, and we, find some peace again, and then we step right back into it. So it's like a pendulum. We keep going back and forth. And it's the balance point. It's the middle path. That's the place to walk. So that you're sort of leaning slightly into the retreat and then back to the advance, and into the retreat and back to the advance. And you're being, and then you're doing from this place of being, rather than being this pendulum that swings back and forth between one and another. You walk that razor's edge. And in doing that, life will bring itself into alignment with what you're being and doing. It will bring itself into alignment with your state of being and your choices for doing. It's both. And when you bring those into alignment, life becomes aligned. And life flows smoothly. Life flows with no effort. This is when you now are the flow. I've said this before. Be the flow. You are the flow when you're in that middle point, when you're in that space of being and doing from the same point, of of that balance between retreat and advance. It's always advancing. Life's always advancing. But it can be in fits and herky-jerky, or it can be smooth and it can be just graceful. So I think that's a great thought to bring to life, that have life be graceful. So thanks so much for being here with me today. I hope it's been inspirational to you. I hope there's been some good nuggets that you can take away. And if you feel so motivated, please share this video with your friends and anybody else that you think might benefit from it. I appreciate that. And remember, always live life from the inside out.